In a previous video, we did a test where we dunked chambers filled with down and synthetic into a body of water to see what happened to the fill. The conclusions of that were kind of that, well, number one, that scenario is just kind of not really a big risk for down gear. It's something that's already easily and effectively managed. All you have to do is make sure you keep your down gear in a waterproof pack liner or waterproof stuff sack or whatever, and you can fall in as many creeks as you want. Go for a swim. It's already a problem that is managed. And then the other conclusion is that even if you were to do that, even if you were to take your down gear and dunk it in a creek, swish it around, submerge it, whatever, it just simply doesn't really get the down inside of that item wet. It gets the shell wet. That absorbs water, and that over the long term could be a risk to wetting out the down. But in the moment, if you're just going to dunk something that's down into a creek and then dry it out, it's not really getting wet. So again, it's a scenario that is easily managed and not really that much of a risk if it did happen. But we do know that down is very hydrophilic, and it is susceptible to degradation from moisture buildup, but that happens over a longer period of time in which moisture is absorbed into the down. So we're going to do a little bit of a different test here. We're going to put those same chambers into this water, set it on top of this water so that it's exposed to it, and just leave it for a long period of time. And then we're going to come back later, pull them out, record the results, and then we're going to mimic trail usage, in which you would then, you'd have a long period of time in which your down was exposed to moisture, and then you would finish using it, pack it up, and smush it down and put it in your backpack or bike packing gear or whatever. So we're going to come back after leaving this in the water for a little bit and pack it up, and then see what the results are after that. So we've got our loose fill poly chamber here, and we've got our untreated 900 fill power chamber here. We're going to set these right there in that moisture, and we're going to set a board on top just to make sure it is in contact with the water. Same thing with our piece of ClimaShield from the previous test. Set that in the water. And pop a board on top. Alright, it's been about 5.5 hours here. But I just got home from work and I'm impatient, so we're taking a look at this test now. Loose fill synthetic polyester hasn't lost any loft at all. The shell's wet, but this is exactly as it was when I put it in there. All right, let's look at the down one. It's actually surprisingly still pretty lofty. It's lost some. You can see that this layer here of down is getting wet, and it's losing some loft there. But it's after 5.5 hours. That's pretty good, I guess, for down. We'll put those back in there for a bit before we come back and compress them. Let's have a look at our ClimaShield. Yeah, that's totally unaffected by the water. It's wet on one side. It didn't absorb anything, really. We'll put that one back in there, flipped over to the other side. And we'll come back in a bit and pull them out of there, and then simulate compression, much like you would when you pack it up and put it in a backpack. Hurry, we got about 9 hours in here. Let's see what we got. Loose fill, synthetic polyester, full loft, pretty much no effect from the moisture. Yeah, shell's very wet. Insulation inside is still full loft. What we got here? The down one is, to be honest, holding loft better than expected. Definitely lost more than anything else, but it's I'm pretty surprised by how much loft it still has. It's definitely wetting out on both sides and starting to lose loft, but it's after 9 hours, that's actually pretty impressive. So, yeah. Alright. ClimaShield. Yeah. We had done this on the other side and then flipped it over and put it on the other side, and still, you know, it's wet on this side. The loft is completely unaffected. Dry on this side. You know, pretty much full loft. No effect from being in the moisture for 9 hours. Alright, so we're gonna compress all of these and stuff them into a sack to mimic what would happen in a backpacking or bike packing scenario, where you might have exposure to moisture over a period of time, and then you take that item with all that moisture and you pack it into your stuff sack or your pack liner and compress it for a period of time, and then we'll see what happens in there. All right. Stuff it in here. All right. Yesterday we put our test chambers into water for 9 hours to simulate a sleep system that was slept in, maybe in colder temperatures where conditions were such that condensation would build up and get parts of the system wet over the night. And then overnight last night we took those chambers and packed them up into this plastic bag here to simulate what would happen if that person took their sleep system that was a little bit wet and then packed it into their backpack, pack liner, stuff sack, whatever, and then went hiking for the day. So this has been sitting for 10 hours. Well, let's back up and talk about the results from yesterday a little bit. The chambers that were sitting in water for 9 hours, the ClimaShield and the loose fill synthetic, actually, they didn't really show any sign of being in the water. The shelves were wet, but the loft of the insulation was fully intact, and it didn't really absorb any of that water. The down chamber did absorb a little bit, but quite a bit less than I expected it to. It was still holding on to some loft, pretty decent loft. Certainly not what it was at the start, but it wasn't totally flat. And then so yeah, we packed them up into this plastic bag for 10 hours, and let's open that up and see what we got. Oh, okay. That's our down chamber. It's a wet noodle. All right. Our synthetic loose fill. There's good loft in there, but we have a pretty uneven distribution. Alright, there we go. That's pretty much back to 100%. Our ClimaShield Apex little square here. Wet, but not really any loss of loft here. That's even without any attention other than just sort of shaking the actual liquid water off of it. It's at full loft. All right. So to be honest, this is what I would have expected to see with the down chamber after simply being in contact with the water for 9 hours. But it fared surprisingly well just being in contact with the water. As long as there was no, as long as you didn't compress it, it seemed like you could get it pretty wet without any real sign of losing too much loft. But once we packed it up and compressed it, all that air was squeezed out of the chamber. Pretty much similar to the submersion test. And then once that air is out of there and you've distributed the water through the down, it just simply soaks it up and goes totally flat. So I mean, and there's really no reviving that until you take hours to dry it and then fluff it and redistribute it. It's flattened. So it's interesting. That would suggest that you can get a chamber of down pretty wet as long as you don't mess with its loft. As soon as it's wet and then it's compressed, it immediately loses all of its loft. So I guess it's not really a realistic scenario. You can't really not compress down. That would be like if you were out in you're out wearing your puffy jacket in the rain and you got it pretty wet, you'd probably be fine until you leaned up against a tree or something like that and compressed a section of the down, in which case that section is going to totally flatten. Similarly to, I guess, it matches up with my experience of internal condensation buildup. You can get a lot of condensation buildup overnight, and your sleep system won't really show too much sign of that in terms of loft loss. You'll see the moisture on the outer shell and whatnot, but you won't see a lot of loft degradation overnight. But once you take that system in the morning and you pack it up into your stuff stack and you pull it out the next night after a day of hiking, it starts to look flat. It starts to look, you see that loft loss because you've compressed it, pushed all the air out of it, and distributed all that moisture throughout all of the fill of the system. And then when you pull it out, the next night, you're expecting it to loft back up and suck that air back in, but you have a system that has soaked in all of that water and just can't loft back up. So it's interesting. Pretty surprised. I do hundreds of tests like this on little chambers like this. My shop is filled with like little squares of down chambers, but I've never actually done this specific test, and it's interesting results.